So our first part of the question was, what is the role of fire in this chapter? And we answered, within this chapter we see a serious growing conflict concerning the people of friendship. While experiencing a contagious epidemic that's killing everyone in their town, they also face a vicious fire that's sweeping through the countryside, coming right for them that could easily wipe out their town if they don't leave. If a town of sick, infected people evacuate the town, they'll only spread the disease while still likely dying. And if they stay in the quarantine, they'll surely die one way or the other, either by burning in the fire or by dying from the disease.
So, section was, how does the growing presence of fire affect Jacob and his hope? So, prior to realizing how close the fire was to approaching, friendship, we see Jacob is still struggling emotionally with the death of Amelia, his family life problems, and the stress of maintaining the disease. Also, in previous chapters, we see the growing doubt in his faith in the Lord and how he begins to question why and how God would do this. So, if you turn to your books on the bottom of page 96, you'll see the quote, "It's not the sickness that frets me," Emil Bjornsson said. "It's that fire up above us. Dull at first, you thought he meant the sun. Didn't understand. You wanted to ask him if he has no fire, but just said, 'My He Lord will sustain us.' He agreed because you're the preacher, not from any real belief. Is it true? In all this, after all this, will the Lord sustain us?" This is a clear starting reference to how the inclusion of this new problem is beginning to diminish his faith further and make him doubt his own trust in the Lord. As the story continues, Jacob becomes more and more aware of the direness of the situation, and it becomes apparent that he becomes darker as things become less safe. Like, he begins to realize how he basically is going to die one way or the other, and as that happens, he just begins to get darker and darker as we see his character develop. This right here. Let's start there. At the bottom of page 11.
On page 111, after Bart and Jacob discuss the border
Into the city.
all right, you say, no one in, no one out. You start to move off, but Bart calls you back. What if the fire comes while you're still sick? All your half-made plans rise up in your mind and then fall. Lie down like scarth hay. No one in, no one out, no matter what. You say and give him a look to make sure he understands. It catches him off guard. That look, too hard, part of a long-gone war.
So, basically, from that, we see up to this point, we haven't seen such a hard and somewhat dark side of Jacob, representing how diminished his faith in survival and sustaining the situation has become. Okay. Another example of how the fire seems to darken Jacob is on page 120. Wonder how the fire line's going, if it's reached the canal. Old Meyer, out there on the Shawana Road alone. You won't sleep. Why don't you pray? You already know. Who would have thought you'd turn bitter, of all people? So, in perspective to like generic literary standpoints, the fire is definitely an antagonist in the book in collaboration with the disease itself. So from both sides of the situation, you see how both these antagonists are against Jacob and how this is testing his faith to the point where he is beginning to lose it.
So clearly the fire, almost forceful role in the situation, has clearly expressed to Jacob that there's no real hope for them. Fire almost plays the role of a cleanser in the story, and relation to the cleansing of a group of people or town, it's usually symbolized by a fire destroying everything and growing from it a new beginning. We see this possible connection proceeding when Jacob burned down Meyer's house. He begins to become sinister, burning more houses and barns, even mutilating a hen. This dark expression clearly reflects how Jacob is losing his mind possibly from the disease, because after a small rampage, he comes home to his family completely restored and happy.
So up to this point, we see lastly that the fire plays a role as a cleanser within the story in relation to both a biblical and literal reference into how he sees that the fire is going to stop the disease from spreading, and how it's basically the solution besides a quarantine to save the people outside the city. And just that in relation to seeing right there in the text that he feels that fire is really the answer. So he begins to lose his sanity and morality throughout the chapter as fire becomes a bigger and bigger presence in his life, and in a somewhat way he feels like it's correcting and cleansing his life in all aspects, which is why after he set things on fire and murdered hens and set barns on fire, he came home and everything was cleansed. So if you look at your study guide and the handout that we've handed out, everything should be in relation to this. And thank you for listening to our presentation. What's up, yo?